thanks everybody for tuning in for this show, and I hope it all goes well. I'm glad that you're all well, and I hope families well through these crazy times.
Can we hold on one second?
Ken, is your,
Ken's muted.
Okay.
are you muted?
I'm gonna mute mine.
Okay.
Yeah, something's causing some feedback.
Okay, oh, thank you. Okay.
Try it again, Alice, I'm sorry.
Okay. No.
Try what again, the whole spiel?
No, that's good, now we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, we're good.
Oh. So I just was welcoming everybody, hoping everybody looks great, sounds great, all your family's great, I hope, these crazy times we live in.
I know.
Sue, if you could do the roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Akiri?
Here.
Mr. Bova? Mr. Brodsky?
Here, somebody's got.
Rocco, you gotta put it back on mute.
Mr. Core? Mr. Coyne?
Here.
Mr. D'Elia?
Here.
Mr. Ford? See him.
Here.
Mr. Lewis? Mr. Karam?
Here.
Mr. Matolo? Mr. Sampson?
Here.
And Ms. Cesney? Betty? No. Okay, we're good.
Thank you. Before we get rolling, I just want to tell everybody that when we meet in person, which I fully intend to do next month, we will be reaffirming everything that we do this evening. Sue is taking minutes. This is being recorded. When we reaffirm, we will let the public know that all of this is available. We'll also list out the resolutions that we passed this evening as well, so there's no confusion as to what it is we're doing this evening. And the right to know will be accomplished then. You have in your packet the draft minutes of our January 27, can you believe that? January 27, 2020 minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion. Second.
Thank you. Any deletions, additions, corrections? All those in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. The first item on our agenda is a resolution award for professional services, which I will turn over. Is Dick there?
Yep, Dick's here.
I'm here.
Right next to me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This resolution under agenda item number 4 is for engineering and archaeological environmental services related to the raw water main. This resolution was originally scheduled to be on the board's agenda for the March meeting, and we did review it at a prior capital committee meeting, and it was recommended that it go to the full board. This is specifically for work related to identifying the route of the second phase of the raw water main, which is about a mile of pipe out of the 3 miles that will eventually be needed. And what this involves is both environmental surveys along the route, wetlands, any areas of environmental concern, limited archaeological surveys, and also eventually geotechnical surveys. Back in January, the board did authorize 2 surveyors to complete a survey of the whole route at $36,000. That work is now complete. With those maps, we can now undertake these efforts. Once we're done with this, we'll be able to pick a precise location for the 5,000 feet along that entire 3 miles, and then go to Brookfield Power and meet with them to determine their concerns with it, if any, and clear the path for their approvals of some additional easements. The total cost is $48,230. We do recommend a sole source award to Rambo Engineers and environmental scientists. It's the former O'Brien and Gear engineers. They've done all of the work on the pipe bridge, as well as all of our hydraulic analysis and preliminary planning on the raw water main up to this point. Just makes sense to continue to use them. From this service, beyond this service, we will be going out for RFPs for actual design of the raw water main, RFPs for the geotechnical services first, and any construction observations. So from here on, we'll be going out for professional quotes for the work. But we do recommend that O'Brien and Gear, Rambo engineers be utilized for this phase because of the reasons noted in the resolution. In the interest of time and because of the vegetative growth and weather, water levels, we did actually have them start out there, and of the $43,000 or $48,000, approximately $6,000 to $8,000 is committed to date for work they've already done. They actually have the environmental scientists going out there Monday, or today actually. So we did start it because it had been passed perusal by the capital committee, and so we are into it for a limited amount of funds. But I'd be glad to answer any questions at this point.
Any questions for Dick? Someone care to move the resolution as presented?
I'll make the motion. I'll second it.
Who is on the
Thank
phone
you.
that made it? Who's on the phone that moved it?
Rich?
Oh,
Rich,
okay,
thank you.
Rich Karen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. And seconded. Any further comments, concerns, questions? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda, the proposal to evaluate data system. You doing that one, Jim?
I'll start that out for now. So you may recall, some of you that, at least most of you that were here at the time, some of you are a little newer, we were mandated by state law to do a cybersecurity assessment. So we had to hire a firm to come in and look for all of our cyber vulnerabilities. We had a range of proposals. We chose IBM even though they were the highest price because we thought they would do the most thorough job, which they did do. And among all of the cyber vulnerabilities, one of the topics they identified was our SCADA system, which is the remote monitoring and control of the water distribution system. We can monitor tank levels, flows of water, turn pumps on and off, etc. The SCADA system as itself, SCADA, by the way, if you don't know, is an acronym for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's an electronic system. It was installed in-house over a bunch of years, but the earliest components in the system go back to about 2005 or so, 15 years old. A lot of the technology is now outdated. It's also obsolete, and a lot of it's at its failure point of life expectancy where we're looking at imminent failure at some point, very, very soon. So IBM identified that, and in their multi-phased report and budgeting that they gave us, it was unfortunately only ranges at the time because they hadn't done in-depth analysis. The SCADA component of it, on the low side, was about $2 million to replace it all out. On the high side, it was probably north of $6 million, potentially as high as $7 million. But again, it was all a range. So when we were discussing this with the operations committee and looking at other things that IBM was proposing for us, their ranges were kind of wide, and several board members felt, and as well as us at the staff level, that their numbers weren't detailed enough for us to really get a good handle on what they were proposing. Eventually we did get some detailed numbers that we'll get to in a minute. But on the SCADA side of it, we agreed at the operations committee that it was a good idea to have an outside firm come in and just assess the entire system in detail. So we were looking at several proposals. We chose one from a company called Brock, which is headquartered in Toronto, Canada, and also Dallas, Texas. Echo.
Thank you.
Okay. So in the meantime, we were looking at Brock. They gave us a proposal to evaluate the system, not to replace any of it, but just to come in and do a detailed analysis. And the original proposal was $62,000. The operations committee at that time, back in February, had voted to recommend it to the full board for the March meeting, which we ended up canceling. And then what transpired was, I'm sorry, someone talking? Oh, it's just someone's unmuted and I'm getting an echo. I'm hearing myself. If you could just mute, that would be good. So in the meantime, at the time that we met with Operations Committee to talk about the Brock proposal, the same day the Finance Committee met to talk about using reserves. to pay for that and a range of other topics. So you may recall, something's still echoing here. Anyway, you may recall that when we did the current year's budget for 2020, we passed it last October. We did not put any budget numbers in for these purposes because, again, going back to the IBM numbers gave us too big of a range. We didn't want to plug a budget number in and find out that it was either grossly overstated or underfunded. So we agreed in October that we would leave that out and then that we would draw down on reserves because it's considered a one-time expenditure at this point, and we would use reserves to fund a number of these initiatives. So the SCADA study was going to come from the reserve account. And then we had other items in the reserve drawdown, and as I mentioned, the same day that the operations committee met to approve the hiring of Brock Solutions to do the SCADA study, the finance committee also met to approve at that time drawing down reserves in the amount of $480,000 for a range of other security initiatives, which we'll get to in the next topic. But after that committee met, we were able to take some of the things that IBM was going to do and shift it off to another company called TriDelta that we use for our firewalling and network administration. We'll get to that again in a minute. But we were able to reduce that number by $80,000. So the reserve drawdown we're proposing is quite a bit lower. I mention that now because at the same time we were looking at the Brock proposal for $62,000. That was for looking at SCADA throughout the entire distribution system. It did not include the treatment plant at the time because back then Suez, who runs the treatment plant, was looking at using their own firm for that. And they were going to do it on a different timetable. They later told us that they were not going to do that, and we all agreed it would be better to have Brock do it at that time since they were going to be here anyway. They got special permission to sneak through the northern border and come down for a week on site to go out with our engineering folks and tour our facilities at our pump stations, our tank stations, and other areas, so they could find out what the technology was that was here, what kind of shape it was in, what any of the extenuating circumstances are, and finish their evaluation. I made a decision based on the savings that we could get out of the drawdown that we would include the treatment plant as a change order for $15,000 and have them do that at the same time. One of the reasons for that was to make sure that whatever we're going to do SCADA-wise in the distribution system would be consistent at the plant. If we ever want to take the plant back over and not farm it out to an outside company, we certainly want to make sure that we have a consistent system. We knew the two would continue to be communicating with each other, but we thought we'd have the same platform. It would make more sense. And so in conversation with Ellis D'Elia, the chairman, Ellis gave me a go-ahead on his word to go ahead and get Brock started on the evaluation pending this meeting and the approval that had been recommended by the operations committee. I don't want to put Ellis in a jam because he did not tell me to go ahead with the change order. What's that?
It's fine.
Yeah, okay. So at this point, what we're looking at doing is asking for your approval to hire Brock Solutions to do that. However, it is after the fact because they've already been on site for a week and they've already developed their at least initial evaluation for us with a report. But so essentially this action would be reaffirming what I did based with the chairman's proposal, or approval rather.
I'll move it, Rocco.
Thank you.
I'll second Bruce.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's who has a question?
I have a question.
Okay, and I think Betty does too, but go ahead, Vince.
What is it that we want? Do we know what we want overall as a SCADA system? You know, in the past, we had a SCADA system installed. I don't think it cost us a fortune to put it in, but do we know how extensive a system we really need to cause our system to be functional and that we can monitor it appropriately without going overboard?
27 sites we
I
have
mean,
right
is
now?
there a statement
Roughly
of
30 altogether.
what we want as an end product? Let's put it that way.
Yes, and we met with Brock twice preliminarily to discuss the scope of what the service was going to be, what the system was going to look like. We currently have approximately 30 sites that we're remote monitoring. But as I mentioned earlier, A lot of that technology that was installed over a 15-year period was, some of it is now outdated and obsolete. There are no repair parts available for it. It also communicates with a protocol that IBM determined was very vulnerable. So what we're essentially going to be doing based on Brock's evaluation is essentially rebuilding the system and having greater ability to do what we can monitor now, but do it in a more secure manner with technology that, by the way, they're not selling to us. It's other people's technology, mostly Siemens, but some others. And it's newer technology, it's more reliable, and it's an open platform. So essentially, the 15-year period, Dick, we totaled our cost over all those years was
Close to $500,000.
close to $500,000, but that included our own labor. And frankly, you know, it wasn't the most technologically advanced. We found very quickly that the radio system that was used for the communications, IBM hacked into in somewhere between 60 and 120 seconds. And some of the switch components didn't work quite the way we always needed them to. Some of the drive interfaces, the variable drives on the pumps, are outdated. So
Okay.
we'll have an improved system, but it really needs to be replaced because it's aging out, is the bottom line.
Well, I don't doubt that. I just wonder if we know what it is we want in the end, so we don't have more than we need and less than we need. But the other question I have is, I noticed in here, there was a statement that said, based on these conversations, it was decided the first step was to develop SCADA master plan, and that going forward, the responsibilities for SCADA system are being migrated to the IT department. Now, SCADA is an engineering problem, it's not an IT problem.
That's the IBM recommendation, because going forward, most SCADA systems now are integrated fully with IT.
The thing about SCADA is that there is a demarcation point between the actual device that you're controlling and the information you're getting as an engineering tool versus the rest of it, which is really a communication network and is part of your IT platform. And so it's more of an IT function, at least in the opinion of IBM, than it is an engineering function. It's a tool for engineering, but the communication network itself is an IT platform.
Yeah, well, I would like to see it under engineering with support from IT, but that's only my opinion.
Okay. Okay. Betty, were you trying to raise a question before?
No, that answers my question. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Pat,
Yes.
so, I'm not sure that I saw an actual resolution. Did I see a resolution on this in the packet?
No, it's for approval.
It was for approval of the hiring. Yeah, it's not a
It's
resolution.
already done.
So it'd be done by motion. Yeah.
Right.
I move that we approve what we've implemented for the study.
Thank you, Bruce. Second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
Thanks. Was that Rocco?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Actually, I think Rocco already made a motion earlier.
Yeah. We're okay.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll second it.
Yes.
Just quick.
Any further questions or comments?
Committee recommended
My
that
only question,
That's okay, we'll get it.
and it's possible when I ran out to put my baked potato on, it might have been answered. At some point, we're going to know what the proposal will be and the cost.
Yeah, you'll know that in about 20 minutes.
15.
Well, 15
Okay.
minutes. Yeah.
I'm not talking about the study, I'm talking about the replacement
Yes.
of the system.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that if you don't mind me deferring it for a few more minutes.
Oh, I don't mind deferring it. I'm just assuming that that might end up being a bonded need because of the cost.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll get to that in a short while if you don't mind waiting a few minutes.
No, I don't mind waiting.
Okay.
Anything else, Bruce?
No, just let's deal with what we've already done.
Any other questions or concerns? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Anybody opposed? Thank you. Next item is use of reserve funds for technology and security upgrades.
Yes.
Who's doing that? No?
I'll take care of that for now, and Jim, you can add to it if you need to. So as I mentioned, there were a range of things that we did not include in the operating budget last October with the notion that it was going to come from reserves. Initially, when the Finance Committee met in February to talk about all the security improvements we were doing that were not budgeted, the categories fell into physical security, alarm systems, new recording and camera systems throughout City Hall and other facilities, the study for SCADA, and some of additional firewalling and network protection that IBM at that time was going to do. And so it was going to be $480,000 in total. But since then, over the last few months, Jim Mack and his folks have had some considerable discussion with Tri-Delta, which is our firewalling and backup, emergency backup system, etc. And they can do a lot of the things IBM was going to do. So their cost is now in there at $50,000. And when you include the Brock study, the security, all the physical security improvements for $127,000, the security at the pump stations, additional $101,000. The cameras at City Hall and the maintenance yard total out to about $42,000 with all new software for recording, digital recording. This was all analog before. We could only store about 3 days of data back then. And then the SCADA systems and the firewalling, the whole thing now totals $398,650 as opposed to the $480,000. So it's about $82,000 less than originally estimated. And again, based on conversations with the chairman and trying to keep these things moving, Ellis said, go ahead and start doing this stuff. We've drawn down so far $130,000 of that, $140,000 of that to pay for some of the work that's been in progress. But this is, again, another request that's somewhat after the fact, but it was something that we all agreed upon back in October, and the Finance Committee meeting in February had recommended to bring this to the board for the March meeting. So, and that came, Bruce, from your committee, so I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, or Jim Corfano.
Other than this was a decision that the committees have made, the board agreed to based on its passing of the budget. We're taking advantage of the past additional dollars that were made available in our cash account, in our balance sheet account. This is a good investment. Doesn't put it on make it a burden on the ratepayer. I'm fully in favor of this this investment, this one-time investment.
Yeah, just to clarify, Ellis, expenditures from the reserve fund are at your prerogative in any event.
So can I renovate the chairman's section?
I believe that's true. I believe that it's the chairman's prerogative to use reserve funds at his discretion without the approval of the board. Am I correct, Ken?
Well, I don't know, but they would never do that in any event.
Well,
Can I clarify?
Can I answer that?
Because I do believe that's the way it is.
I can answer that, if you don't mind. So essentially, in our legislation that set us up, and all of our bonding indentures, there's a general account called the Repair and Improvement Fund. We need to maintain that at a minimum balance of $500,000 at all times. And the chairman can authorize expenditures from that fund. The purpose of that fund was really for emergency repair work, but nevertheless, the chairman can authorize that. However, what we've done on our own through board policy is set up additional reserves for specific purposes. And so as far as our trustee goes at the Bank of New York, they don't see our individual funds for the repair, replacement, renewal fund, for example, or the infrastructure maintenance fund. Those are all internal sub-accounts that we've set up through board policy for different reasons. All of the money down at the Bank of New York, they consider to be the repair and improvement fund. So it's really a question of, yes, the chairman can authorize it, but if on paper, internally, we're dipping into one of our sub-accounts that was set up with board policy, we just kind of thought it would be better to have the board agree that we're going to draw that down since the board sets those funds up.
Well, I think it's a good idea. It's fine.
Okay.
I would also like to just remind everybody and make clear for anybody that happens to listen to the tape through 4L or anything else, that both of these items were vetted by and approved by committees. In fact, we have to be able to operate in certain things,
Yeah.
you know, during this worst history in our lifetime, so, we went forward, just so that's very clear. Where are we on this thing? We need an approval for this?
Yes,
Did you move this,
Is there a
Bruce?
motion?
no one's been, it
There's
has
no
not
motion.
been
I'll
moved.
second.
Oh,
I move that we allocate the stated amount of funding for, from our, the most appropriate reserve fund,
O&M.
as determined by the controller, for the purposes of these one-time technology and infrastructure improvements.
is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Vince? Vince? Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Alex,
Yep.
Draco, so the money, we're gonna be using actually our own money to be doing, for the purchase of these, added expenditures, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
I mean, I know, unless I read this wrong, but we were gonna be, wasn't there something, I think, Pat, that you sent out today about talking about, borrowing to do, to bond some of this stuff?
Yeah,
Or is
that's-
it separate?
That's a little bit different. Bruce's motion was the most appropriate reserve fund to draw it from. We already made the determination on that one of our internal sub-accounts we call the O&M fund, which is operations and maintenance. That's where this money has been and will be pulled from. And it's really just for the items that we did not put in the budget for the security upgrades. The stuff that's in the proposed bond is a different category, and I'll walk through that when we get to it.
I just didn't like, so like a lot of these purchases, are they like, the useful life of these things, are they like, what, 5 years or less, or? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, you know, you make a point in after talking to the bonding companies or your advisor there, and they make a good point. You know, the interest rates are only going to go up, and this is really an opportune time to borrow money. If we were going to bond, we might as well do it like one time. Is this something we want to consider to put in, you know, in a bond and borrow more money, or rather than using our own reserve account, or do we want to go this way? Just an option. I mean, not that I want to change anything, it's just something to think about. Do we want to go about it that way?
Well, the O&M fund is already funded as cash on hand that we set aside along the last bunch of years to be used potentially for certain kinds of expenditures. In this case, the SCADA study, for example, is a one-time expenditure that I don't think we'd want to be paying for over 20 or 30 years, but borrowing money to pay for that.
Okay.
And the same thing with some of these items, these security fencing things. Some of those things might have a useful life for 20 or 30 years, but we agreed that we would use reserve funds to address the security issues identified by IBM. And that's really what this money's being used for. It's not for, in most cases, the purchase of long-term assets.
Okay, very good.
Anything else, anybody? Without any further comments, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. Let's see where that are we in this thing. We have the fourth quarter investment statement, Jim.
Yep. I believe the fourth quarter, so the last quarter of last year and the first quarter of this year.
Oh, and we had one from 2006. Sorry, just kidding.
So, Public Authorities Law requires that we present to you a statement of investments and any earnings and expenses related to that. I believe they are behind, I think they're behind the miscellaneous. So you should have two statements.
Yeah, we received them.
Okay. Any questions?
How bad we get hit on the reduction in interest?
Well, keep in mind, it really did not hit until after March. So we actually did very well for 2019.
Good, okay.
Any other questions, Bruce? Anybody for Jim? Then we need a motion to approve the fourth quarter investment statement as of.
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Who's
And
second?
also the first one. Any other comments or questions?
Joe?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Thank you. Next, do you have additional finance,
Yes.
Yes.
info, Jim?
Now
Yes,
it's time for a dose of cold water. here.
yes. You have,
Did we just move both of those quarters? Because there's two separate quarters. There's one ending
Yes.
12/31.
Yep.
We did, okay.
Yes, both quarters.
Okay, thank you.
okay.
Thanks.
So I believe you also received the January, February, and March monthly reports. And I know we'll get into this a little further. As everybody recalls, the economic shutdown occurred in mid-March, if I have it correct. So we saw just a little effect at the end of March. The real impact occurred in April, which we have a preliminary report we haven't given to you yet, but we just finished it today. There was a significant downturn in April that occurred. We were looking at a deficit in addition to $500,000, $350,000 just in water sales alone. So I actually did a cash flow. I know we're going to get into this a little further, but I have estimated running it out to December, if we continue on that downturn, we're going to have a deficit close to $3 million. However, in April, we did have somewhat of a recovery.
In May.
I'm sorry, May. In May, we had a recovery. So we're looking at, I was looking at $350,000 deficit. Now that's more or less gone away. We essentially collected what we collected in the previous year of about $1.9 million in cash receipts. So we had somewhat of a recovery, but we're still below our budget. So right now we're looking still, if we were to run it out for the year, we're probably looking at $1.7 million as a deficit. But we're hoping that this turns around.
In the meantime, Jim and I have sat down and gone through the budget and have come up with a number of provisions that may allow us to close that gap. And I'll just take a minute to run through it. We have 5 vacant positions that have accumulated over the last year or so, positions that have not been refilled. If we maintain a hiring freeze on those 5, and we'll play it month to month, if things start to rebound, we may decide that we're safe enough to do some hiring. But in the meantime, those 5 positions with wages and benefits combined and FICA taxes and everything else would, oh, I'm hearing myself again, I thought that's about $340,000 that amounts to. There are a number of miscellaneous line items throughout the rest of the budget that we are looking at to generate additional savings. So we think by freezing those positions, at least temporarily, and putting the brakes on some other spending, we could probably generate $650,000 or so in operating budget savings by, reducing expenses. Other measures we'll get to when we come to the bonding. You'll see that we proposed, at least for now, shifting some things off. And I know that raised a few questions and some eyebrows, but I actually have some different thinking on that since this morning. So this is evolving, particularly because of the BRAC report that we just got literally 3 hours ago. Nice tune. Okay, there you go. So in the meantime, we do have a plan to try to keep that gap closed and avoid ending the year in the red. And if anybody has any additional questions on that, we'd be happy to answer them. But the other bulk piece of this savings to close the budget gap. May or may not rely on bonding, depending on whether or not you buy our explanations and our proposals. So,
Bruce has a question.
Yes, go ahead, Bruce.
How much of the problem is our water invoices not being paid?
It's averaging about $350,000 per month.
Okay, are we communicating, I mean, I understand making accommodations for people in terms of payments and maybe putting some stuff off, allowing them to do that and that sort of thing. But are we communicating with them about what they owe and what accommodations we're willing to make? Because at some point, the amount of what they owe is going to be beyond their ability to pay anyway, and we're going to run into a different problem with these customers. So are we only communicating them with their regular bills, or are we communicating with people who are unpaid in a way that they know we're giving them time, but this is what they owe?
We haven't done additional mailings or communications like that. One thing we are doing is that we've stopped putting late fees on bills. So just for that reason, so that if somebody's falling behind, it doesn't continue to accumulate and get bigger, the more delinquent it gets. The other question that's going to come up, and I was going to bring this up later under my report, and I've been talking to Ken about this. The state legislature has passed legislation now in both the Senate and the Assembly. As of today, I don't know if the governor signed it yet, but it would bar us from turning off water to anybody that doesn't pay us, and it would require us to send out notices indicating that. We actually will be required to inform our customers that we're not allowed to turn their water off if they don't pay us. That's a little bit different than I know what you're saying. And I don't know that we're getting, Andy Villagrano's here, I don't know if you can see her way in the back there. Wave your arm, there she is. I know that we've had some inquiries over the phone of people saying that they're running into hardships, but it hasn't been really over that overwhelming, right?
No, it hasn't, no.
Well, my only recommendation is basically it's a communication one. We know who has not paid, and then we have a sense by people who have already contacting us of those who are having difficulties. I have been getting, not that I've needed it, but I've been getting various notices from people that I owe money to, credit cards and, utilities, that are keeping me informed that I owe them, but we're going to be, helpful to you. I think we need to do the same thing. I think we need to keep people informed of particularly the people who are delinquent.
Yeah.
So that nothing is a surprise, because you know what's going to happen. At some point, all these people that have only heard from us quarterly are going to start complaining publicly that they never knew what happened. So I'm suggesting that we spend some time paying attention to those people who haven't paid and letting them know what they're responsible for and what we're willing to do. I understand not shutting them off, and that was coming, but that has nothing to do with the fact that they're going to complain when they start getting 2 quarters bills, or some of the 3 quarters bills, and we're gonna look like the bad guys because we've not communicated with them.
Well, do we want to consider trying to do something that, I don't know if we can do it now, but do you go to a monthly payment schedule for them and break it down in smaller pieces for them? I mean, it's an option. The other thing is, do we still collect for sewer tax? If they really are problem, they have to do that.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, well, the whole issue is communication. We've got to have a plan, and we got to implement it so that we communicate. Whether we give them an opportunity to pay monthly now, we're already looking toward that in the future. It's going to be impossible to change the thing now with the sewer. That just to create other PR issues. I just want to start communicating with them and not use the quarterly bill as the excuse.
No, I agree. And actually, Ken Barbaro, who is muted right now, but if you want to chime in, Ken, I would invite you to do so. But we've had some conversation over the past week about developing a form. that would go out to all the customers related to balances due and their ability to pay, whether they're having a hardship. And also, I'll point out too that we regularly put people on payment schedules when they do fall behind, and it is a large number. So, you know, it's at any given time we have customers that are actively in payment programs making installments. We do that individually and have agreements with specific customers. But we are looking at developing a form, and Ken, I don't know if you want to add to that at all?
Right. So the legislation which was passed by the legislative branches and is up to Cuomo for signature. I don't know if he signed it yet, but I'm sure he will. First of all, applies only to residential, which is important because those are generally going to be less than, of course, a commercial setting. But it does require the utilities to send out a enclosure which basically tells everyone if you're having financial difficulty. And of course, that's one of the issues with the legislation is it doesn't define what financial problem is. So it could be, you know, if someone's making $5 a week less, they could claim financial impairment. And I actually watched some of the, it was very exciting, some of the discussion of the legislation, and they keep saying, well, the Public Service Commission is going to define it, but there's nothing in the statute that says that. So basically, it's going to prevent turnoffs, and right now they sort of have it's 180 days. It will run from the date of basically everything going back to normal, and they've also bantered about a March 31st date as the outside deadline. But, you know, there are a lot of problematic issues with it because of the fact that you have bills which are in the landlord's names, you might have bills which are in the tenant's names, what's necessarily, you know, residential versus commercial. And at this point, we also have the issue that which we're looking into come, I think, October. We ordinarily push non-paid bills over, and they become liens on the property through the tax rolls. So that's something else we have to look at, whether we're permitted to do that. It might be that the two legislations are enacting legislation, and this one are conflicting on that. But yeah, if we're going to have to send something out to the users, and I think also probably I would recommend putting something up on the website. And I think that what we would want to do is basically have people fill out something in writing in which they sort of affirm that they suffered financial consequences in order to be eligible. And I think we can do something about sort of establishing acknowledgement of the amount owed and how they intend to pay it.
So I think the answer is twofold, Bruce. One, we'll do whatever we're mandated to do by legislation, obviously. But we can, even ahead of that, do a communication program where we can reach out to people that are behind and remind them of what that amount is. And that way, at least they're aware of it. And let them know that we are in a position to do installment payments if they need that to ease the burden.
And please include some comment about online, the ability of doing things online that they can sign up for, and getting their email addresses.
Yeah.
No communication should go out that has a response that doesn't ask for cell phones and emails.
Agreed. Okay, very good.
So we have a resolution sitting out there for approval. Are there any more comments regarding that?
Wait, what are we waiting to approve?
I don't
think
Didn't we have a motion on this?
No, it's
On
just,
something?
Oh, no, not yet. No,
Not
this
yet.
is informational purposes as part of the finance report.
just,
Okay, sorry, got confused.
Nope, that's okay, you have me confused.
This is easy to do.
Okay,
Pat, on this operations thing, we already covered that.
we did, yeah. Yeah, we did. So,
Executive Director's Report, which we are going to do thoroughly and efficiently.
yes, we will. There's a lot here. I'm trying to keep it as brief as I can, but there's a lot to cover. So you all
know.
received the bonding letter that was sent out, and then a follow-up email this morning. I don't know how many of you had a chance to go through it very carefully, but before I get into any of that, I will say that I detailed this in a memo this morning. We were on a bonding schedule of every 2 years. We were borrowing around $6 million with closing costs that would come in around $7.5 million. And that would take us through 2 years of our capital improvement program. So we were conducting around $3 million a year or so in those bond issues. We haven't bonded since 2016, so it has now been 4 years. And as I mentioned in the communication this morning, we had been planning on bonding later this year. With everything going on in the federal government, now $5 trillion in additional debt, they will be flooding the bond market with U.S. Treasuries. What that means for us as we try to sell water revenue bonds is that eventually we will have to offer higher yields in order to attract buyers to buy our issue. And so eventually people in the bond market that are offering bonds for sale will find as they compete for buyers, interest rates will start going up, the yields will start going up. So based on that, our financial consultant has recommended that we not wait till the fall, we do it as fast as we possibly can and try to get it moving. So that's the reason why this has kind of come out rather abruptly. We probably would have talked about it a few weeks earlier had we been in the same room. Nevertheless, the other thing I want to point out is that you may recall that we had Phase 2 of our raw water line project moving forward. The raw water line, for your review, is a new line being built from Hinkley Dam to the treatment plant. As Dick mentioned earlier, it's about 3 miles. Phase 1 is the pipe bridge that goes over the gorge right behind the treatment plant. Phase 2 would do about 1 mile of replacement of brand new 54-inch diameter pipe. Phase 2 is priced at $10 million, but we had applied for a grant through Empire State Development, and we were informed that we're going to get $3 million towards that $10 million. However, we don't get $3 million unless we get the matching funds. So for this phase to move forward, we're including $7 million for that one project alone in this bond issue. So on top of that, there were a range of other things that were included in it. However, Bruce got ahead of me earlier, very intuitively, with good questions, and that is we now have the Brock report. When we hired Brock to do the evaluation of the SCADA system, we knew it was going to be pretty expensive. We didn't really know how much. It turns out Dick Goodney, off the top of his head, was pretty darn close. I hesitated putting in a marker in a bonding request for it because we didn't know what it was going to be and we weren't quite sure when we were going to get the pricing. The agreement with Brock was that they'd evaluate the system and get us an evaluation of this system. We didn't know if that was going to include a complete pricing out for everything that they recommended being done. We literally received this at 1:30 this afternoon, and so on a conference call. The price that Brock is now proposing to do all the SCADA work, if we want to do it as essentially a turnkey replacement over a 12 to 18 month installation, which would keep us within the normal 2-year bonding cycle, is $2.1 million. You may recall earlier I told you that IBM had ballparked it in a range that could have been anywhere between $2 million and $6 million, possibly even more. So now we know we have a hard price at $2.1 million, which was not in there. The other piece of the bonding that Jim and I were proposing in order to try to close the budget gap for this year, anywhere between $1.5 million and $2.5 million, hopefully not higher than that. One of the things we were looking at doing was taking a few of the items that we had over the years built into our operating budget to get it out of bonding. Only items with long-term life cycles. For example, fire hydrants you can get 75 to 100 years out of. Meters last at least 20 years. Then some of the larger vehicle equipment, essentially tractors, we could stretch out that far. So what we had proposed in order to try to close the gap this year and salvage the budget, and we didn't know if there was going to be a turnaround in time for next year, so we proposed putting 2 years of those items in this bond package. However, if we want to be optimistic, and I invite your input, But if we want to say that the turnaround in the economy and the turnaround in water usage in our district will happen this fall, and that next year will be at a much less risk of running a shortfall based on water sales and revenue, then we can back out 1 year of those 2 years of those hydrants and meters and such, and lower the bond amount by $600,000, knowing that we probably at this point want to include the $2.1 million for the SCADA. That would put the new total at 15.2. Now, as I mentioned earlier, normally we were doing $6 million every 2 years. That would have been 12 years. Right now, we're slightly above that for 4 years, but knowing that $7 million of that is the raw water line, which is a big ticket item, phase 2 of that line. So if we were to back out 1 year's worth of those capital things that we were going to move out of the operating budget and put them back in for next year's budget, and then use only the 1 year to sort of reimburse this year's operating budget, that would help ensure closing any gap and shortfall that we would run into by year end. So that's kind of where we sit right now, but the main goal is to try to get some approval from the board to initiate the request with the Water Finance Authority to get this process underway. Now, I will say this, even if they get this request tomorrow, we will not close on these bonds until mid to late August. So what I would also propose in tandem with this is that the items we've discussed, I would like to ask both the Finance Committee under Bruce and the Operations Committee under Frank Matolo to look at the financing options here as well as the Brock study and see really what kind of costs we want to include, particularly for the treatment plant, because some of that has been upgraded already. We're thinking that we can maybe pare it down a little bit. And then we can finalize a number for the Finance Authority before the bond issue is actually fully put together and the OS, the official statement for the bonds, is actually filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the bonds go on sale. But right now, if we back out that 1 year, we're at 15.2 million. The debt service on that would be roughly $940,000. I mentioned that by the year 2022, we have a very solid estimate, in my opinion, that revenue from CRE operations will be totaling about $600,000. So the new revenue from CRE would cover 2/3 of that debt service. The remainder would require about a 1.5% rate increase to support the full debt service of this $15.2 million. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions and comments.
By the way, finance is Rocco. I don't want to take that one.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just sitting here thinking, Jesus, I get demoted.
I apologize.
To you, Bruce.
I'm so used to Bruce being involved in these committees. I apologize. Thanks, Bruce, and sorry, Rocco.
Sorry.
Jim,
Yes.
over the next 3 years, do we have any reduction are we paying off any bonds?
There are the 2001A bonds that are ending at the end of this year, but we kick in the 2000 bonds kick back in, so no. Overall, the debt service is about the same.
In fact, you might recall we talked about, I think in December or maybe November, that we have 1 year left on some bonds going out, but we also have new bonds kicking in. And in each case, it's $1 million of debt service. And rather than raising rates to double up and accrue $1 million for debt service twice in the same year when we don't need it moving forward, what we agreed to do was to take money out of our debt service reserve account that's now overfunded by the tune of about $932,000 that we're not required to have on hand there anymore, and use that to cover the 1 year where we would have been doubling up.
Yeah, we discussed that in the budget.
But the outgoing bonds are going to be replaced by new debt service kicking in, so it's a break-even scenario for us.
Is there any cash savings by doing bands as opposed to bonds initially?
We might get slightly lower rates on the short term, but the disadvantage is that we'll still pay the closing costs. They're not as high on bands, on bond anticipation notes, which is short-term borrowing for anyone that's not familiar with that. But you do have to refinance them, and then roll them into a new bond issue, and by the time we do that, we could see a substantial rate increase above what we might do if we put them in the bonds now. So we could issue bands and then, you know, refinance them in 2 years, but they could end up at 3 or 4% instead of 2.5%.
So, I mean, without doing any real calculations, if we can keep the year, if we can balance the year and do what we're talking about, we may be looking at, what, 4-5% for 2021?
Yeah, so the 940,000 is about, on rates, is about 4.1%.
Well, no, he's talking about overall. You talking about just debt service or overall budget?
Overall.
Oh,
Well, we haven't really gotten into the budget preparation cycle. We'll be starting that up probably in the next 60 days or so.
I know, but you know what you're
Yeah,
shooting
we're
for.
probably in that ballpark. Now, I will say too that likely what would happen is if we do a bond issue at 15.2 million, knowing that we can offset most of the new debt service with revenue from CRE, but also knowing we won't really see the bulk of that revenue until 2022, we would probably structure the bond issue to defer the first principal payment. And then just do interest only in the first year. And that way, when the full debt service kicks in, we'll have a substantial amount of new revenue to be able to deal with that. That would only be in the 2022 budget. So for next year, yeah, we're probably somewhere in that ballpark, Bruce.
yeah. I would say the debt service, if it was interest only, would be, so you go half of that, 2%, a little more than 2%, and then you do another 2% the next year.
Yeah.
Plus operations and not knowing what's going to happen the rest of this year.
Right.
Now,
There's no state money. There's nothing the state's going to put up
Absolutely not.
to cover anything.
A few things we're tracking. Number one is that the CRE construction continues on target, as I mentioned. By the middle of next year, the building will be up, they'll begin tooling it. They'll probably do some early stages of production late next year. We will see some revenue from CRE, probably in the last quarter of 2021. How much right now, we really don't know. If I had to guess, I wouldn't really bank on more than $150,000 to $200,000 worth up there. But that may come into play for next year's budget. The other thing, frankly, that we're pretty nervous about is we don't know what our 4 colleges in the area are going to be doing this fall. So we have Utica College, Hamilton College, MV, and SUNY. We don't know if they're going to do online learning for this fall or if they're going to be bringing students back. I checked all their websites in the last few days. They all say that they are optimistic and trying everything they can to resume normal coursework on campus this fall. But we don't know if that's going to happen, and if it doesn't, and those dorms are empty, we're going to continue to see a pretty big hit from 4 pretty large users. So that's another huge question mark, which is why we had maintained the idea that if we could take this year's expenditures for the hydrants and the meters and some of the large equipment and build it into the bond issue, then at least we have a little more wiggle room in this year's operating budget.
No, I think you need to do, I also think we have to start talking publicly about and with our elected officials, letting them know the potential impact on customers as a result of this coronavirus. We have to be in the conversations if and when any dollars are talked about at the federal level going to the states and the states redistributing. We shouldn't be at the end of the line, we should be at the beginning of the line. And so that means we need to start letting people know, the right people know.
Yeah.
We're going to have to do what we have to do. But we should let them know that there's going to be an impact, and we should, if they can help, they can reduce that impact to the customer.
So, how the conversation goes and not having the notes in front of me, I always get confused exactly where we're at. So what are you looking for right now from us?
So essentially, the way the bonding process works is that you as a board authorize me and or staff to initiate a request to the Water Finance Authority. And the way it works is between the 2 boards is that the main board, you folks, govern most of the operation and set policy and set budget and rates. The Finance Authority is the borrowing wing of the overall organization. They are the ones that set out to borrow the money and deposit it in our accounts for our use. And so they don't borrow unless they receive an official request that comes from this board to borrow the funds. And in that request, we generally tell them how much we need. So I will say at this point that if we move ahead with the SCADA thing, which we're being urged to do so based on IBM's and Brock's evaluation of the system, and our own in-house guy who built it, who says it's aging out and is at risk of failure, then we're talking about 15.2 million. I will say, however, that when we meet with the Finance Committee, Rocco, and the Operations Committee, that number could come down some. I don't see it going up. So that would be the maximum amount, and it could very well be that we'd end up asking for something in a somewhat reduced amount. So it would be less than that, but it won't be more than that. But generally, it originates with a letter from me. That's the draft letter that I've sent to you that goes to the Finance Authority members to kick that process off. So the approval would be on approving that letter to go out.
With a maximum of 15.2?
Yes, so it's a little different than the draft that you've received because of the information we just got this afternoon.
Any other questions regarding this, or does someone care to move that approval?
I'll move it.
Who's
I'll
that?
second it.
That was Vince.
Rich?
Richard seconding, okay,
Who's
thanks.
the second?
Richard seconded, Vince motion, right?
Right.
Any further discussion regarding this?
Well, this is Joe. I do have a question on the total amount. So if I look at the 15.2 million, we're saying 2.1 is for the SCADA improvements.
Yes.
7 million for the water line, the raw water line.
Yes.
And then that leaves 6.1 million for capital improvements. But my understanding was that we do 3 million in system renewal a year. Does that, are we going to do that in addition to the projects that Dick had listed, which is about 3.1 million?
You know what, that's a great question, I'm glad you asked. I mentioned earlier that we've been borrowing about $3 million a year over 2 years, but we haven't borrowed in 4 years. And one of the things we did over the last bunch of years is to set up a capital maintenance fund to do certain categories of smaller projects on a cash basis. So having that capital maintenance fund in place is the chief reason why you're seeing a lower amount here than what we typically do. Dick, does that, that drives what you're thinking? Is there nothing you want to add to that? So I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah, the actual smaller projects total up to less than $3 million. Now, the $3 million also included some of our larger ticket items. So how you break out between and differentiate between the $7 million for the raw water line and some of the equipment purchases and fire hydrants versus the remaining smaller accounts, you know, we probably could break it up differently if we were going to do that. But the $3 million per year did include some larger ticket items that you don't see in this list because we're not doing any other larger ticket items right now beyond the smaller miscellaneous ones.
But in answer to his question, no, there's not another $3 million right now.
God, thank you. One more thing I'll mention is you see the FEMA thing. We've applied to FEMA to be reimbursed for some of the storm damage from last October's rainfall and some future remedial projects. That $500,000 matching funds would be if we got almost all the projects approved. And our matching amount is only 12.5%.
12.5%.
12.5%. The other 87.5% will come from FEMA if they get approved. So it's possible not all that $500,000 would get used as matching funds, but that would be enough for if they approved our entire list. So there's a motion, there's a second. I'm sorry, Ellen, so I'm going to take over your role, but just want to get everybody refocused again.
I would think we get to the vote, and I really don't want to prolong this aspect of things, that along the lines of what Bruce has already said regarding communications, you may want to consider some kind of an ad campaign that kind of lays out the hit that we have taken and also compliment all of our employees who are frontline employees, at least as far as I'm concerned. They've done an awesome job. I want the rest of our board to start thinking about a way that we might be able to show some appreciation from the board to these workers who went to work, not knowing what the hell this thing was. They didn't have any choice about sitting on their asses collecting interest for $600 a week. They had to work, and not one person lost service out of the 130,000 people we serve every second of every day. So I don't want to lose track of that, and I'd like, Pat, if the board agrees with me, that we put something together that shows that appreciation, but also hit that we're taking. People ought to realize, we don't get squat from government over the course of our lifetime as an authority. They ought to be aware of this. So I want to work on some lines.
We have to.
And then I'm ready to vote.
Great idea.
Great idea.
Yes, good idea.
All those in favor
Aye.
of the resolution?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. Next step.
Sure. One more piece under the director's report. It's just kind of an update. A little while back, we had approved an agreement with the Village of Yorkville to do sewer billing on their behalf, and it was a regular standard agreement. We do billing for other entities, and they just haven't started that yet because even though we approved it, we haven't actually put their charges on our bills yet. They're still under review, so that hasn't. Oh, Oriskany, I'm sorry, what did I say, Yorkville? I'm sorry, Oriskany.
Yeah, we've been doing
Thank
it
you.
for about 5 minutes.
We've been doing, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. My mind's a mess, I apologize. Oriskany. So we're not doing the sewer charges yet for Oriskany because they're still haggling a bit over how much they want us to do, and they're under legal review right now. So that's it for the director's report. And as Ellis mentioned, our folks, I'm very, very proud of everybody here. All of our senior staff continue to work every day, making sure the place was running. Our maintenance folks and other customer service, laboratory folks, etc. We're splitting time and rotating. We did that more for their own safety, not necessarily because they didn't want to come to work. But everybody did a great job. May 18th, when phase 2 kicked in, we brought everybody back full time. So we are at 100% staffing right now, and it worked out very well. So I am extremely pleased with the way everybody cooperated and maintained our services. And so Ellis, I agree with your comments 100%.
Moving on to all business, we received an email, I believe Friday, with a resolution concerning the healthcare system.
Yes.
Yeah, that's under old business because it was an agreement that we had originally already approved. But the hospital project is moving forward. They're doing a bunch of water main work in and around it, replacing some old stuff, dead ending some other things and abandoning it and capping it. Something very recent has come up because they want to do, I guess, an improvement for their benefit. I'll defer to Dick to explain that to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. As many of you know that have driven downtown, we have two major projects. The Oriskany Boulevard reconstruction that started 2 years ago, and of course the hospital project. 2 years ago, we entered into an agreement with the DOT to replace 4,000 feet of main under that project at the DOT's cost. And we also at that time budgeted just under $200,000 for some betterments, one being the John Street work where that main repaired about 3 months before broke before we were gonna repair it. But so that project continues. This year the hospital project started in earnest, and there's about 5,000 feet of main being abandoned and about 3,000 feet of main being installed because of the way the streets are going to be reworked. But between the two projects, there's about a little over 300 feet of work that the DOT was doing in kind. They were replacing existing line with the existing size, 8-inch, but the hospital project needs it to be upsized to a 12-inch. So they're desiring to have the DOT contractor do it. However, they don't have an agreement with the DOT contractor. We do as of 2 years ago. So this would be a pass-through at no cost to the Water Authority, where the project is budgeted, agreed to between the hospital and the authority at about a little over $40,000. We are not on the hook under the agreement for any costs, but it would be done under our agreement with the DOT. The hospital's actually going to place the money on deposit with the authority, and then we would pay the contractor, the DOT's contractor, as we did with our other betterments. All of this was in place, so they had a mechanism to do it. The hospital, quite frankly, wouldn't have time to go to the DOT and have an agreement at this point, because they all have to go up to the controller for approval. It just wouldn't happen in time. So this is really a favor and a benefit to the hospital project, and really is other than our time to work on resolutions, but it's all part of a significant improvement to the water system that we're getting at virtually no cost at all. So that agreement was prepared by the hospital, reviewed by Ken Bobberow, and it's tweaked a little bit from what you saw last week. I know, Ken, if you want to jump in with any of that, very minor changes to it, but certainly we feel it's reasonable and would recommend its approval.
Ken, is there any?
Right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we actually, I think I got the most recent version of the contract around 4:30 or so today. I think the way the resolution is set up is to permit Pat to sign the agreement, but it is a straight pass through. I put language in there so that if we have money on deposit, if the thing goes south, we pay them back, but if we don't have the money anymore, they have to go fight with the state or the contractor for it. So there's no risk to the water authority for any monies that have been deposited with us.
So Ken, with the last minute tweaking that's gone on, is there anything in your opinion that would be substantively different that would require the board to vote on an amended version of what they've already received? Or is that covered?
I thought they just received a copy of the resolution.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
correct.
that's what I meant.
Yeah.
That's
But the resolution.
The resolution is passed just to let you to sign it, Pat. The only major difference, there was a weird thing where they had put something in about insurance, which made no sense because neither one of us were doing any work on the job site. So that's been removed. And then they wanted a start date, which didn't matter to us because if, we don't have their money, we don't have it. If we have their money and they want it back and it hasn't been expended, it doesn't matter either. So, basically it is a pass-through. My understanding, talking with counsel for the MVHS, was they thought that the work that required this agreement was going to be started this week, so.
Okay, so I misspoke, but the resolution that the board has received does not need to be altered in any way, right?
No, it does not.
Okay, thank you, that's all I wanted.
Any questions for Ken or Pat regarding this resolution?
No.
Someone care to move the resolution as presented?
I'll move it.
Thank you, Rocco.
Second, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. Any new business? With that, thank you all very much. This isn't as easy as it looks. So I thank you all for, I thought it was a very good meeting. I thank you all for attending, and we will meet in person. I've had it with shit, I'll tell you that much.
We appreciate everybody's patience. That was a lot of information, so thank you for bearing with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Rockmore.